Welcome to the deep dive. We've got quite a stack of sources right here provided by you, our listener, covering today's really compelling headlines from India.
Yeah,
Think of this as, our way of getting straight to the important stuff. We pull out the key insights, unpack the stories behind the news.
that's exactly it. And these sources, they paint a really broad picture, don't they? A country dealing with, well, a whole range of things right
It's
now.
delightful.
We're talking about profound tragedy, intense international sport,
Right.
critical social indicators, complex diplomacy, even internal political debates.
And international tensions, too.
Oh, absolutely. Ongoing tensions. And believe it or not, a dispute over fruit.
A fruit dispute. Okay, that sounds intriguing.
It does. So our mission here really is to go beyond just, reading headlines. We want to help you understand the core of each story, the nuances, and critically, why it actually
Yes.
matters.
And when you dig into these sources, like you said, some really compelling narratives jump out. Unexpected turns, data that makes you rethink things, geopolitical complexities,
Yep.
moments of real sorrow, but also intense competition. It's dynamic.
It really is. And the real value, I think, is understanding the context, seeing how these headlines might connect, They don't just exist in a vacuum.
Okay, then. Let's unpack this. We have to start today's deep dive with what is undoubtedly the most significant and, frankly, the most somber headline from the sources. That's the tragic passenger plane crash. Happened yesterday, June 12th, near Ahmedabad.
Yes, it's devastating news. A real pall over everything else.
Absolutely.
The core facts reported, they indicate it involved a flight from a leading Indian airline. It was flying from Delhi to Ahmedabad.
Okay.
And the accident happened very close to the destination, just shortly before it was due to land, apparently.
One rural area.
Yeah, described as a rural area kind of on the outskirts of the city.
The initial reports in these sources, they paint a really harrowing picture of those final moments. It says the plane lost contact with air traffic control. And then just a rapid, uncontrolled descent before impact.
Yeah, it sounds terrifying.
The impact was severe, scattering wreckage over a really wide area,
Yeah.
which, immediately made rescue efforts harder.
Right. Complicates everything.
Eyewitness accounts mentioned seeing intense flames, thick smoke, even hearing a loud explosion when the plane hit the ground.
And despite all that, the huge wreckage field, the fire, the difficult terrain, the emergency response seems to have been remarkably quick.
That's good to hear.
Yeah. Local police, fire services, medical teams, they were dispatched within minutes, according to the reports.
Facing incredibly hazardous conditions, I imagine.
Absolutely. The sources really emphasize that. But their initial efforts were actually successful in pulling several survivors from the debris.
In those first critical hours.
Exactly. Right after the crash, which, even though it's small compared to the scale of the tragedy, it says a lot about their rapid deployment and bravery.
But the human toll, it's just immense, heartbreaking. The sources confirm over 180 passengers and crew were on board.
Yeah, over 180 souls.
And the latest updates. Dozens of fatalities confirmed already. Many survivors critically injured, needing urgent care.
And the recovery operations are still ongoing, so the exact number of casualties, it's still being determined as they secure and search the site. It takes time.
Understandably.
And in response to this huge human impact, the government and local authorities, they've moved quickly to set up support systems.
Like what?
Well, emergency helplines for families desperate for information. You can only imagine what they're going through.
Absolutely.
And local hospitals treating the injured, they've made urgent appeals for blood donations, which tragically just underscores how severe those injuries are. Support structures for grieving families are also being put in place.
The critical question now, of course, is why? Why did this happen? The sources mention initial suggestions leaning towards maybe a catastrophic mechanical failure.
That seems to be the early thinking, yes. But it's crucial, and the sources stress this. Investigators are not ruling out other possibilities at this stage.
Such
Things like adverse weather conditions, was there anything unusual happening? Or even potential pilot error? It's all still very much under consideration.
just leads straight into the formal investigation, right?
Exactly. It's already underway. The Indian Directorate General of Civil Aviation, the DGCA, they're the lead agency.
Okay.
They've started a formal inquiry, and they'll have a team of experts assisting them.
From the airline manufacturer.
Likely, yes. Representatives from the airline, definitely.
Yeah.
From the aircraft manufacturer to look at the technical side. And, crucially, potentially international aviation authorities if needed, bringing in that global expertise.
And the black boxes.
That's a major focus. Recovering and analyzing the flight data recorders and the cockpit voice recordings, the black boxes.
Designed to survive these impacts.
They are. They hold vital information, aircraft performance data, crew actions, communications, right up to the incident. Analyzing that data is absolutely paramount to figuring out the sequence of events.
And the official reactions.
Yeah.
Condolences, pledges for inquiry.
Yes, India's prime minister, other senior officials, they've expressed condolences and pledged a thorough, transparent inquiry to find the cause and hopefully prevent anything like this happening again.
This kind of tragedy, it inevitably sparks debate, doesn't it? About aviation safety.
Oh, absolutely. Especially as this is, the sources note, one of the deadliest air crashes in India in recent memory.
Wow.
So yeah, it's prompted immediate calls from different groups for stricter regulatory oversight, better maintenance protocols for commercial planes, maybe even reviews of airline procedures.
There's been a real outpouring of grief, too, mentioned in the sources.
Yes, both within India and from the international aviation community. It shows the global impact, that shared concern for safety.
It's just a stark reminder of the risks involved in air travel, even today.
It is, and it really makes you think, doesn't it? What systematic, long-term processes need to follow something this devastating? How do authorities and airlines make sure the lessons learned from the investigation actually lead to concrete safety improvements, not just for one airline, but across the whole sector? How does that analysis translate directly into prevention?
Okay, from that incredibly somber news, we need to shift our focus quite dramatically now to a different kind of intensity, the high-stakes world of cricket, specifically the World Test Championship final.
Yes, a complete shift in emotional weight, but like you said, intense in its own way. The setting is iconic. Lord's Cricket Ground.
The home of cricket.
Indeed. And it's Australia versus South Africa. The match, based on these descriptions, is heading towards what they call a thrilling conclusion.
Thrilling how?
Well, it's been marked by rapid wickets and just sheer dominance by pace bowling.
Okay, so bowlers on top. What's the score situation? End of day 2, the sources say.
Right. At the close of play on day 2, Australia has the edge. They lead South Africa by 218 runs overall.
218. How do we get there? Australia batted first.
They did. And they managed to build a 74-run lead in that first innings. Key to that was their captain, Pat Cummins.
Ah, Cummins. Great bowler.
Phenomenal performance here. He took 6 wickets for just 28 runs, an incredible spell that just ripped through South Africa's batting, bowled them out for only 138.
Wow, 138 is low.
It is. And the source points specifically to a dramatic collapse after lunch on day 2. South Africa lost their last 5 wickets for only 12 runs in just 5.5 overs.
That's fast. The kind of sudden shift Test cricket is famous for.
Exactly. But Australia's second innings, it hasn't been a walk in the park either, has it? The sources say they faced intense pressure.
From the South African bowlers, yep.
Absolutely. South Africa came out fighting. Kagiso Rabada, who was already brilliant in the first innings, 5 for 51.
Another talk quick.
He struck critical blows early in Australia's second dig. In 1 over, he got rid of both Usman Khawaja for 6 and Cameron Green for a duck.
Ouch. 2 and an over.
Huge moment. Then Lunjin Anjadi delivered what the source calls an inspired spell. He took 3 more wickets, including the big one, Steve Smith, for just 13.
So Australia stumbled.
They did. By the end of day 2, Australia was 144 for 8. Struggling.
So the picture painted is that both teams are finding it really tough going against this relentless pace bowling.
That seems to be the story. Scoring is hard. And the momentum, it's just been swinging back and forth constantly, keeping everyone on edge.
That volatility, especially when conditions favor the fast bowlers, like it seems they do at Lord's.
It's classic Test cricket. Australia, yes, they have that lead 218, but at 144 for 8, they're vulnerable.
So South Africa still has a chance.
Definitely. Their bowlers have kept them right in the game. If they can wrap up Australia's tail quickly on day 3 and then somehow put together a solid chase, a comeback is absolutely possible.
And for Australia.
They'll be relying heavily on their own powerful bowling attack. Cummins, Stark, Hazelwood. They need to defend whatever final target they set. Take those 10 South African wickets.
It really sounds like a match where those individual moments, like Cummins taking 6 for 28, can just completely change the direction of the game.
That's the beauty and frustration of Test cricket. And what's fascinating here, the source emphasizes, is that with 2 whole days still left to play, the result feels genuinely up for grabs.
Could go either way.
Completely. The low scores, the potent pace attacks. Any single session could dramatically shift the balance. It's poised perfectly for, well, an unpredictable finish.
Let's stick with cricket for a moment, but pivot from a current match to a future challenge. The sources bring up India's upcoming tour of England, and there seem to be some big questions around their bowling strategy for that series.
Yeah, this is a really critical point as they gear up for what's always a demanding tour. England's conditions are unique.
What's the main concern?
It boils down to player availability and depth, especially in the pace bowling department. The sources highlight a couple of major issues. First, Mohammad Shami is out. Fitness issues.
That's a huge loss. He's world-class.
Massive loss. And on top of that, their main strike bowler, Jasprit Bumrah. He's apparently only expected to play in 3 out of the 5 tests.
Only 3. Why is that? Workload management.
Likely workload management, yes. It's a long tour. 5 tests back-to-back is grueling for fast bowlers. So the team management, they've got some significant gaps to fill in those other 2 matches, maybe even rotate within the 3 he plays.
And the sources mention India's bowling coach, Morin Morkel, pointing fingers. Well, not fingers, but pointing to someone specific.
Not pointing fingers, but highlighting a need. He specifically mentioned the all-rounder, Nitish Kumar Reddy. Morkel emphasized that Reddy needs to step up, contribute more with the ball, improve his consistency, play a bigger role.
Okay, so they see Reddy as part of the solution.
It makes sense. Reddy, along with maybe Shardul Thakur, another seam bowling all-rounder, they're expected to be key in providing support, bowling those crucial overs, especially when Bumrah is resting.
What's Reddy's record like?
His test bowling record is, well, modest so far. Only 5 wickets, all taken down in Australia. So, as Morkel's comments suggest, his role is definitely set to expand. And in English conditions, where swing and seam are often king.
Yeah, that's a different challenge.
Exactly. Morkel's view seems to be that if Reddy can contribute more effectively with the ball, it not only helps balance the team attack, but also boosts Reddy's own game as an all-rounder.
Who else is in the pace attack?
Yeah.
The sources list a few names.
Right. Bumrah and Mohammad Siraj are expected to lead the line when available. Then you've got support from Akashdeep, Arshdeep Singh, and Prasidh Krishna mentioned. So there are options, but maybe less proven depth than they'd like without Shami.
And they're up against England's Bazball, that aggressive batting style.
That's a major strategic headache for India's bowlers. Bazball puts bowlers under immediate constant pressure. They look to score fast, attack from the outset.
So India's bowlers need to hit the ground running.
Precisely. No time to settle in. Morkel is quoted as being pleased with their preparation, though. He mentioned their proactive mindset in practice, which is positive.
Morkel also made a key point, didn't he, about England's style leaving little room for adaptation.
Yeah, that's critical. You can't afford a slow start against this England side. Bowlers need to find their rhythm, execute their plans right from the first ball of the first test. Top form required immediately.
But Morkel seems confident, commending players stepping up.
He did. He commended the players for taking ownership, embracing the challenge, and the management, according to the source, feels confident in the squad's all-round strength. They believe they have the resources to handle this demanding 5-match series.
So wrapping up the cricket talk,
Yeah.
it sounds like the big story for India and England will be how their bowling depth holds up.
Yeah.
Can the supporting cast step up, especially when Bumrah's out?
Yeah.
And can they counter Bazball effectively?
That seems to be the crux of it. Their adaptability, how the likes of Siraj, Reddy, Thakur, and the newer guys perform, that's going to be absolutely critical to their success.
And connecting this to the bigger picture in sports.
It really highlights that constant strategic puzzle, doesn't it? Top-level sport isn't just about your stars. It's about managing resources, dealing with injuries, adapting to opponents, handling different conditions, developing and trusting that squad depth is key for sustained success.
Okay, transitioning now to a completely different sphere, but one of significant national importance. We're looking at India's ranking in the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Index.
Yes, the 2025 report. And the main finding, as laid out in your sources, is that India's ranking has actually slipped.
Slipped? By how much?
Dropped 2 spots compared to the previous year. India now ranks 131st out of the 148 countries included in the index.
131 out of 148, wow. And the sources mention a key metric, the gender parity score.
Right. India's overall score is just 64.1%, which, when you compare it regionally, places India among the lowest-ranked countries in South Asia.
That's a stark comparison within its own neighborhood.
It is. And to understand that ranking, it's worth remembering what the index actually measures. It looks at gender parity, the gap between men and women across four main areas:
Which are?
economic participation and opportunity, educational attainment, health and survival, and political empowerment.
So it's pretty comprehensive.
Yeah.
Did the report show any positive signs?
Well, there was a very slight improvement in India's overall score, up by zero point 0.3 points, but the fact the ranking still dropped suggests either other countries improved faster or perhaps disparities worsened in some specific areas relative to global trends.
But was there one area where India did see more improvement?
Yes, there was. The dimension of economic participation and opportunity showed a more notable positive shift. India's parity score there improved by 0.9%, reaching 40.7%.
Okay, 40.7% parity. Still a big gap, but moving in the right direction. What drove that improvement?
The source highlights that the biggest contributor within that dimension was an increase in estimated earned income parity. That climbed from 28.6% to 29.9%.
So suggesting some small gains in women's relative earnings or economic standing.
Potentially, yes, incremental gains, though obviously starting from a very low base. 29.9% parity in earned income is still extremely low.
And despite that bit of positive news, the report clearly shows continued struggles in other areas.
Absolutely. Significant gender disparity remains, particularly, the sources note, in political empowerment. Representation of women in government and leadership roles, that remains notably low.
What are the underlying reasons mentioned for this persistent gap?
The report points to deep-seated structural issues. These are fundamental barriers within society, the economy, politics, that prevent women from having genuinely equal opportunities across the board.
So if we pull back from the numbers, what's the main takeaway here?
I think the findings really underscore the ongoing need for sustained, targeted policy reforms in India. Yes, there are some incremental gains, like an estimated income, but the overall message is clear. The source says substantial work remains to bridge the widening gender gap.
Widening gap, even with the slight score improvement.
Well, widening might refer to the gap relative to top performers or specific areas. The point is, progress isn't fast enough or broad enough. Improving India's future ranking requires tackling those structural barriers head-on, especially in areas like political empowerment, where the disparity is starkest. Progress is uneven.
It highlights the need not just for government policies, but probably broader societal shifts too, right? To dismantle those barriers.
Exactly. It's a complex challenge, and it raises an important question for you, the listener, to think about. Given that there is some positive movement in areas like economic participation, how can India maybe leverage those small successes? Can lessons learned there be applied to accelerate progress in the dimensions where it's lagging most significantly, like political representation or maybe health outcomes?
Let's move now into the complex arena of international relations. The sources pick up on recent statements from former U.S. President Donald Trump, offering to mediate between India and Pakistan.
Yes, and his comments, as reported, were quite Trump, very assertive. He explicitly vowed to mediate in the long-running disputes, especially over Kashmir.
What did he actually say?
The source quotes him saying he believes he can solve anything, and that he told India and Pakistan, referring to their rivalry over Kashmir, "I said, I can solve anything. I'll be your arbitrator."
Arbitrator. Okay. And this comes at a time of recent tensions.
It does. It follows a period just last month where there were clashes, and the U.S. actually helped broker a ceasefire after about 4 days of fighting. That fighting was triggered by a specific tragic attack on civilians in India's Kashmir region.
So there was recent U.S. diplomatic involvement already.
Yes, before Trump's public offer, the current Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, had apparently announced that both India and Pakistan had agreed to commence broader discussions at a neutral site. So suggesting a U.S. push for dialogue was already happening.
How do India and Pakistan typically react to offers of international involvement like this?
Their reactions are usually quite different, and consistently so. Pakistan has generally welcomed international mediation or at least involvement in the Kashmir issue. They often see it as a way to internationalize the dispute.
And India.
India, despite its strong ties with the U.S., remains consistently cautious, often outright opposed to external involvement.
Why is that? What's the history there?
It's deeply rooted in their historical position. India firmly opposes any third-party mediation in disputes with Pakistan. Their stance goes back to the 1972 Shimla Agreement.
Signed after the 71 war.
Exactly. That agreement stipulated that all outstanding issues between India and Pakistan must be resolved strictly bilaterally just between the two countries through discussions and negotiations. India views Kashmir as an internal matter and a bilateral issue, rejecting any role for outside arbitrators.
The sources link Trump's comments to that recent violence, too, don't they? The attack on tourists.
Yes, that attack, where gunmen killed 26 tourists in Kashmir, was a deeply disturbing event that significantly raised tensions. India responded militarily and accused Pakistan of backing the attackers.
Which Pakistan denied.
Pakistan denied involvement, yes, and in turn blamed India for escalating the conflict. It's a familiar pattern, sadly.
How did India respond officially to Trump's offer?
Promptly and clearly. India's Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Randhir Jaiswal, reiterated their unwavering stance. He stated plainly, any India-Pakistan engagement has to be bilateral.
A clear dismissal.
A very direct dismissal of external mediation, reaffirming that position based on the Shimla Agreement.
The source suggests Trump's comments might just be his usual style.
It notes they perhaps reflect his often unconventional transactional approach to foreign policy, but the actual feasibility of his offer gaining any traction, given India's firm and long-held position, that remains highly uncertain, to say the least.
It's fascinating, though, how these core tensions between two nuclear-armed neighbors just persist, and how finding a path to resolution, whether bilateral or international, remains so incredibly challenging.
Absolutely. The persistence of the conflict, the different approaches each side takes to potential solutions, it continues to define regional stability or instability.
Following on that theme of diplomacy, but shifting the focus inward now, the sources highlight some domestic political criticism in India, specifically targeting the current government's handling of relations with the United States.
That's right. This critique comes from a prominent opposition figure, Congress MP Jairam Ramesh. His main argument, as reported, is that India has recently suffered 3 distinct diplomatic setbacks related to the U.S.
3 setbacks, what are they?
Based on these perceived setbacks, he's publicly called on Prime Minister Modi to hold an all-party meeting to discuss India's foreign policy direction.
Okay, so what's the first alleged setback Ramesh cited?
It was a statement made by General Michael Kurilla, the head of U.S. Central Command. General Kurilla apparently described Pakistan as a phenomenal partner in counterterrorism efforts.
A nominal partner. Ramesh took issue with that.
He did, quite strongly. His counterpoint, cited in the source, is that this description comes despite Pakistan's history of sheltering Osama bin Laden. He's referencing that major historical event to highlight what he sees as a glaring contradiction in the U.S. assessment.
Okay, what was the second alleged setback?
This involved U.S. recognition of Pakistan's Army Chief, General Asim Munir, specifically Munir receiving an invitation to attend U.S. Army Day on June 14th.
Why is that seen as a setback by Ramesh?
His reasoning ties back to Munir's past statements. Ramesh argues Munir has used provocative language reinforcing Pakistan's claim on Kashmir. He specifically mentioned Munir referencing the 1940s two-nation theory, the basis for Pakistan's creation. Ramesh believes these kinds of remarks encourage terrorist activity.
So for Ramesh, the U.S. inviting and recognizing Munir, given those statements on Kashmir, is diplomatically problematic from India's viewpoint.
That's his argument, yes, a diplomatic misstep by the U.S.
And the third issue he raised, it relates back to Trump's mediation offer.
Exactly. It was the U.S. State Department seemingly reaffirming former President Trump's claims about potentially mediating between India and Pakistan.
How do they reaffirm it?
Ramesh pointed out that the State Department spokesperson apparently referenced Senator Marco Rubio's earlier role in suggesting discussions between the two countries. This, Ramesh argues, happened despite India's consistent, repeated assertions that Kashmir is strictly a bilateral issue under the Shimla Agreement, and India's flat rejection of third-party intervention.
So Ramesh sees the U.S. even referencing mediation as ignoring India's clear position.
Yes, he views the U.S. continuing to float the idea, even by referencing past efforts, as a disregard for India's stated policy.
How did Ramesh tie these 3 points together?
He summarized his criticism by arguing that a specific Indian diplomatic effort, which he called Operation Sindoor Delegation, a mission that visited the U.S. aiming to communicate India's stance against Pakistan-based terrorism, effectively failed. failed to prevent these three perceived setbacks.
So he sees these incidents as evidence of ineffective Indian diplomacy with the U.S. on this front.
That's his conclusion. And based on this, his demand is political. He wants opposition voices included in foreign policy discussions.
An all-party meeting, you said.
Yes, and the Congress Party has formally demanded a special parliamentary session to debate these concerns. Ramesh urged Modi to prioritize governance over politics by involving all parties in decisions on national security and foreign policy, arguing it would present a stronger, more unified front.
So stepping back, what does this internal critique really signify?
It highlights a significant political debate happening within India itself, doesn't it? Questioning the effectiveness of current foreign policy, particularly how India manages its relationship with a key partner like the U.S., especially concerning the long-standing sensitive issues with Pakistan.
And connecting it to the bigger picture.
It's a perfect illustration of how international relations and domestic politics are deeply intertwined. Opposition parties often seize on perceived diplomatic stumbles or challenges to criticize the government, question its competence, and push for changes in policy or decision-making processes, often arguing for more transparency or broader consultation.
Okay, shifting gears again geographically. Let's look at another international relationship currently facing significant strain, Canada and India. The tension seems to be ongoing, focused on Sikh activism in Canada and these serious allegations of interference by Indian agents.
Yes, and the timing noted in the sources makes this feel particularly raw right now. It's happening just before the 2-year anniversary of the assassination of Sikh activist Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Canada.
Right. That event caused a major diplomatic rift. And now Sikh organizations in Canada are making a specific demand.
A very high-profile one. They're urging the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, to actually revoke India's invitation to the upcoming G7 summit.
The G7 being held in Canada.
Yes, in Alberta. So they want India uninvited from a major international summit hosted on Canadian soil.
What's the immediate trigger for this demand?
It follows recent revelations about what's being called an alleged Indian surveillance plot. And this plot apparently targeted Jagmeet Singh, the outgoing leader of Canada's new Democratic Party.
Surveillance on a Canadian party leader? What are the details?
The sources mention a press conference held on Parliament Hill. A spokesperson for the World Sikh Organization, Balpreet Singh, cited new evidence suggesting that Indian agents were tracking Jagmeet Singh.
And Jagmeet Singh is known for?
He's described as an outspoken advocate for Khalistan, the movement for an independent Sikh state. The source also references reporting by Global News, which allegedly linked the agent involved in this surveillance to an Indian gangster named Lawrence Bishnoi.
Lawrence Bishnoi. Why is that name significant?
Because Canada's National Police Force, the RCMP, has previously linked Bishnoi to threats made against pro-Khalistan activists who are living in Canada, so that connection raises serious alarm bells.
And the consequence for Jagmeet Singh?
As a direct result of these disclosures and the security concerns, authorities reportedly placed Jagmeet Singh under police protection about 18 months ago, which really underscores how seriously Canadian security agencies are taking these alleged threats and surveillance activities.
This whole situation just pours fuel on the fire of already strained Canada-India relations, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Tensions spiked dramatically last year after the previous Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, made that public controversial statement, accusing the Indian government, based on Canadian intelligence, of orchestrating Nijjar's assassination in 2023.
Yet despite all this, the current PM, Carney, still invited Modi to the G7.
He did, which, as the source notes, is a potentially interesting diplomatic signal. Maybe an attempt to keep lines of communication open, maintain some level of engagement despite the really deep problems in the relationship right now.
But the Sikh leaders see it differently.
They do. They view India's alleged actions, the surveillance, the potential interference, as a direct violation of Canada's sovereignty. They're demanding stronger political action from Ottawa, arguing that inviting Modi under these circumstances sends completely the wrong signal.
What's the broader context here in Canada?
It plugs into growing concerns within Canada about foreign interference generally from various countries, but there's particular focus now on these allegations regarding India's intelligence operations on Canadian soil. The Canadian government is under significant domestic pressure to show it can effectively tackle these security risks and protect its citizens, its sovereignty, and its democratic institutions.
It's an incredibly sensitive, politically explosive issue,
Oh.
with huge implications for the bilateral relationship, Canadian security, and its diverse communities.
It really is. And what's fascinating here politically is how that decision to extend the G7 invitation to Prime Minister Modi remains such a flashpoint within Canada. It highlights that very difficult balancing act the government faces, trying to manage diplomatic relations while responding forcefully to extremely serious allegations of foreign interference and threats against its own citizens.
Moving from those political and diplomatic hotspots to economic negotiations now, the sources indicate India and the United States are hitting some snags in finalizing a trade deal.
Yes, and there's a bit of a ticking clock involved here. They're apparently under pressure to get this deal finalized before July.
Why July? What happens then?
Because if an agreement isn't reached by then, higher U.S. tariffs on certain goods are set to take effect, which would obviously create new trade barriers and could potentially escalate friction between the two economies.
Okay, so there's urgency. What are the main sticking points, the things they can't agree on?
The sources identify two key areas that are proving particularly difficult. First, tariffs that were imposed way back during the Trump administration. And second, disagreements over how genetically modified or GM crops are regulated.
Right, GM crops are often contentious. What's the U.S. position?
The U.S. is seeking concessions from India on GM crops. They argue that if India had fewer restrictions, looser regulations on importing and using GM crops, it would significantly boost agricultural trade between them. Open up India's market for American GM products like corn or soybeans.
And India's stance.
India remains cautious, very cautious on GM crops. This stems largely from domestic concerns, worries about food safety, potential environmental impacts, and also pressure from farmer groups concerned about things like seed sovereignty and the cost of proprietary GM seeds. So strong internal factors shape India's position.
And the other issue, the Trump-era tariffs.
Yes. India has its own major demand here. They are pushing hard for the removal of U.S. tariffs on Indian steel and aluminum exports. These were imposed by Trump under Section 232, citing national security. India argues these tariffs have unfairly hurt its exports and wants them gone for fairer market access.
So are they making progress? What's the outlook?
The sources suggest that despite ongoing talks, getting an immediate resolution on these specific, tricky points remains uncertain. Both governments apparently want to avoid more trade disruptions, especially with the global economy being what it is.
Yeah, nobody needs more uncertainty.
Exactly. But resolving these deeply entrenched issues is proving tough.
And that July deadline just adds pressure.
It really does. If they can't bridge the gap on tariffs and GM crops in the next month or so, it could trigger those increased U.S. restrictions, leading to a worse trade environment for India, maybe even prompting counter tariffs.
The outcome here seems pretty significant for the overall relationship.
Absolutely. It will influence not just this specific deal, but the broader direction of India-U.S. trade relations, future economic cooperation. A deal could signal positive momentum.
And failure.
Failure to agree by the deadline could escalate economic challenges for key industries in both countries, agriculture, manufacturing, might even dampen investor confidence a bit.
So businesses, policymakers,
Yeah.
they're all watching closely.
Undoubtedly. Everyone's hoping the negotiators can somehow find a compromise, a breakthrough that supports economic stability and growth for both sides. Which raises an important question for you to ponder. With that deadline looming, how much real flexibility do you think either side actually has? Especially on issues that are so sensitive domestically, like GM crops in India or those politically charged tariffs in the U.S. Where does the compromise come from?
And finally, for our last story today, we end this deep dive with something a bit unexpected, perhaps, a domestic economic dispute within India, bringing us down to a regional level, but highlighting some fascinating political dynamics.
Sure.
And it's all centered around mangoes.
That's right, a political standoff sparked by mangoes. The heart of the issue is a conflict that's erupted between two southern Indian states, Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh.
What happened?
It kicked off after Andhra Pradesh suddenly implemented a ban. They banned the entry of Totapuri variety mangoes coming from Karnataka's border regions into Andhra Pradesh.
A ban on mangoes from a neighboring state. How did Karnataka react?
Their chief minister, Siddaramaiah, reacted strongly. He publicly called the ban abrupt and unilateral. He warned it directly threatens the livelihoods of thousands of mango farmers in Karnataka by disrupting established supply chains.
Why is Andhra Pradesh so important for these Karnataka mango farmers?
Siddarmaya highlighted the specific reliance. Totokuri mango growers in Karnataka depend heavily on the pulp processing facilities located in Andhra Pradesh's Chittoor district. That's where a lot of their mangoes go to be turned into pulp for juice, canning, etc.
So blocking access to Chittor is a major blow.
Huge. He warned that restricting entry could cause widespread post-harvest losses. Basically, ripe mango spoiling because farmers can't sell or process them, directly hitting the income of thousands of families.
Did Karnataka just complain, or did they threaten anything?
Oh, there was more than just complaint. Siddaramaiah criticized the move politically, saying it undermines cooperative federalism, that idea of states working together. He argued interstate trade barriers like this go against that spirit.
And the threat.
He even warned of potential retaliatory measures from Karnataka, including possible disruptions to the trade of vegetables from Andhra Pradesh to Karnataka, showing how quickly this could escalate into a broader tit-for-tat trade conflict between the states.
How quickly did this all happen?
Very quickly, it seems. The sources say the Chittoor district collector issued the ban order on June 7th. Immediately, officials from multiple departments, revenue, police, forest, marketing, were deployed to rigorously enforce it at border checkpoints, not just with Karnataka, but also Tamil Nadu, suggesting a wider restriction by Andhra.
And Karnataka's formal response?
Came a few days later, Juneteenth. Karnataka's chief secretary officially raised the issue with Andhra authorities, urging them to rethink and lift the ban. The source notes the history here. Chittoor has long been a major mango pulp hub with symbiotic trade ties with Karnataka farmers.
Symbiotic ties now broken.
Exactly. Those farmers now face huge uncertainty. Reports say hundreds of tons of Totopuri mangoes remain stranded at the border, unable to enter Andhra for processing.
And the timing makes it worse. Mango season.
Precisely. It's peak mango season right now, ripe fruit ready to go. This puts immense pressure on both state governments to find a rapid solution. To avoid this escalating into a full-blown interstate trade conflict, disrupting other goods too. Farmers, traders, processors, everyone fears significant financial losses if this drags on.
It's quite something. How a localized agricultural policy.
Yeah, a ban on one type of mango from a neighbor can almost instantly blow up into a major political and economic dispute between states.
It's a powerful illustration, isn't it, of how crucial coordination between states is within India's federal system. Needed to keep the economy running smoothly, prevent these kinds of regulatory clashes from hurting ordinary farmers and businesses caught in the middle.
So the takeaway is pretty clear. Even something as delicious and seemingly simple as a mango can become a serious point of contention, exposing friction over interstate trade and those principles of cooperative federalism. And that brings us to the end of this deep dive. Looking back at today's quite diverse set of headlines from India, we've really covered a lot of ground.
We certainly have.
From the deep sorrow of that air crash near Ahmedabad to the intense drama of the World Test Championship final. Then looking at that crucial social data in the Gender Gap Index, the complexities of high-level diplomacy involving the U.S., Pakistan, Canada.
Ongoing trade negotiations as well, right? The trade talks with the U.S. And wrapping up with that, surprising but impactful mango dispute between Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh.
And hopefully, by digging into the details, the context that your sources provided, this deep dive has really shown the value of looking beyond just the surface headlines.
Yeah, getting into the nuances.
Exactly. Understanding the underlying complexities, the data points that matter, the political dynamics at play, and maybe seeing some connections between these seemingly separate events that are shaping the news today.
We certainly hope this has given you, our listener, a clearer, perhaps more textured picture of some of these key events and trends reported from India.
And we'd encourage you, as always, keep exploring these topics yourself. Keep an eye on how these stories develop, how they might intersect down the line, and maybe to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Considering the sheer variety, this complexity of challenges India is facing right now, spanning domestic issues like regional trade fights and internal political critiques, all the way to major international challenges like geopolitical tensions and tricky trade talks.
Yeah.
How do these seemingly separate threads potentially influence each other? In subtle ways, maybe, or perhaps even in significant, unexpected ways. Think about, say, how domestic political pressures might constrain foreign policy choices, or how international tensions could impact economic cooperation efforts, or even how something like an agricultural dispute might actually reveal deeper issues about how well India's internal economy is integrated. Lots to consider.